Yeah, I
So
guess.
yeah,
Yeah, I was saying. I guess my issue was that in the Quran, like it's this lost book is referred to as the Injil, which could generate a lot of confusion, right? Especially given at the time of the Quran's revelation, then the main meaning that term would have had would have been for the Christian New Testament, right? Because Christianity was a established religion in the Near East at the time. So, and it doesn't really make a distinction between the gospels that the Christians of the time believed and the original true message, which was revealed to Isa alayhi salam, right? That's
yes, sir.
yes, I can see you now. Finally. Nice to finally see you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
same here. So
Indeed.
first things first, the Injil coming from Greek. Greek
Yeah.
is a more of an influencer than anything else.
Hmm.
The semantics is not the central discussion.
Yeah.
The discussion is something else, which means that the original gospel, the original book, the Revelation, could have had a different name. And now we're calling it Injil because, we know the name through Arabic now. And ironically, in Hebrew, it's also called Injil.
Hmm.
Okay. So it could have been later on picked up, and now we're using it. My real confusion is as to why does it matter whether the Greek had the original root word? Why does that matter? What does it change?
For me, my issue with it was that I was associating the original Greek word with the Greek composed gospels which we have, right? And so and that would
Like
have been
what? Which gospel is Greek imposed?
I mean like the okay, I don't as you mentioned the Dead Sea Scrolls are not in Greek, but most of the Gospels of the New Testament were originally written in Koine Greek, right? Um,
No, no, they're not. No, that's an assumption. The Greek and Greece and Christianity meets at the point of Septuagint, not before that.
hmm. Well, the Septuagint is the Old Testament. I'm speaking about the New Testament, but
No, Septuagint has very few books of the Old Testament. The Septuagint is actually a manuscript of the Old and New Testament, except the book of Naviim. And the fact that the books of Naviim are there is the Jewish argument. And how did they come, like book of Isaiah and Zechariah? How did they end up in the Septuagint? Because when the original Septuagint was written, it was supposed to carry only the five books of Torah,
hmm,
right? And
yeah,
the New Testament, because the Christians came together to write the Septuagint, not the Jews. They only borrowed the Jews.
okay,
Yeah.
interesting.
So the fact that there are more than five books of the Old Testament in the Septuagint is actually a case by the Jews that the Septuagint is not as as authentic or credible as it has made out to be, because it's historically contradicting, because the original Septuagint by definition should not have any book of the Naviim.
Yeah, of course. Interesting. Okay, I did not know that. I thought that the Septuagint was just the the translation of the first five books of the Hebrew Bible. So that was my mistake.
That's supposedly why they borrowed the Jews. But
Yeah.
who borrowed the Jews? The Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
There were seven people who, or maybe 11, some say seven, they were expats, in
Hmm.
Greece, because of this project.
Okay, okay. Interesting. Okay, thank you for bringing that to my attention. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I guess my issue was about the um yeah, I was associating Greek with what could not have been the original message, and so that's why I
Yeah,
was thinking. Yeah,
but the revelation never came in Greece, because Jesus never
exactly,
spoke Greece, nor did John. Uh,
exactly,
and
exactly.
and
Yeah,
Paul was a Roman citizen, not a Greek citizen.
that was my issue. Like, why would the original message be referred to in the Quran, like the original message, as this Greek derived term?
Yeah,
That was my
yeah.
original
So
issue. So,
yeah.
yeah. But I guess you described it. You explained it that terms gain currency and they take on a lot of meanings to different people in
And
different
traction.
cultures.
The
It's
word is
true as well.
traction. Greek, the language, had a lot of traction in Hebrew and Amharic, and uh,
Yeah.
and hence a lot of words from Greece flew across the Mediterranean into many prose and literature and poetry.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to the next question now,
Yes, please.
which um, I guess it would be was Dhul-Qarnayn Alexander the Great, to put it simply.
Oh, not at all. Not in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I would also agree, given the fact that Alexander the Great was a polytheist for one, it doesn't make sense. But based on the I guess rudimentary research that I've found, there are a lot of striking parallels between the the story of Dhul-Qarnayn in the Quran and several renditions of the romances of Alexander the Great over several
Or
centuries.
or or Cyrus.
Sorry?
Cyrus.
Osiris,
Yeah,
the Egyptian god,
both.
right? Or
See, let's
or
just
oh, Osiris. Okay, oh, Osiris. Yeah, the
not
Persian,
the Egyptian
the
god.
Persian
That was
Shahanshah. Yeah, yeah,
that would be
Cyrus the Great.
Osiris.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Okay, yeah, yeah, Cyrus the Great, the Persian Shahanshah, of course. Yeah.
yeah. Let's just
Um,
take Alexander as a case study. Give me
yeah.
one. Uh, okay, let's start with the similarities.
Hmm.
Other than the fact that he had a lot of land under him in his empire, what is the other similarity that you see? By the way, when you say Zulkarnain, you're talking about the Zulkarnain of the Quran?
Yes.
Okay. So you know about the Zulkarnain of the Quran?
Yes. Yeah, I've read like some of the I haven't read the full Quran, but I have read some some parts of it. So
Okay.
yeah, so I'm
So
referring to that specifically, that specific version. So
okay.
there's a few similarities. I mean, for one, we can say the name itself, Dhul Qarnayn, based on the research I've done, my Arabic is very poor, but Dhul Qarnayn means he who has two horns.
Or
Um,
two realms. Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, one interpretation
Man
would
of
be
two
two
realms.
horns, right? Um,
Well, the horn itself is not a horn of an animal horn. The word horn actually is uh rooted in let's just say a reminiscence of a cloud which is shaped as a horn,
hmm,
okay, or
okay.
a pathway
Yeah.
which is climbing from up. It is an uphill pathway going up in the skies or the heavens.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to make a horn shape, okay, like a wormhole. Okay,
Okay.
so it could mean anything, but
Yeah.
yeah, two horns. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's true that the meaning is vague, but the similarity is that in I believe it was the Syriac rendition of the Alexander Lament. I don't remember the exact rendition, but it says something along the lines of God has caused iron horns to grow on Alexander's head as a symbol of the conquest that he brought among the different realms of the world, something like that. And indeed, the historical Alexander the Great, when he conquered Egypt, it is said that he received a crown of two horns because he claimed to be the son of the Egyptian god Amun. So this sort of motif of a conqueror of realms having a crown of horns, two horns, this sort of was passed down through history and eventually was adopted into the Alexander romances, which by this time the Alexander the Great was now being referred to as like a monotheist king, a believing king, because he was such a, I
Which
guess
Alexander was not.
he wasn't, but by the time of the Syriac romances, they had sort of co-opted this mythology and put a Christian twist to it, so to speak. I guess because
Still,
they,
still, they'd had to put a lot more data, credible, credible
um,
looking data to put Alexander and monotheism in the same sentence. This
oh, of
this is
course. Yeah, but
Far,
again,
far-fetched.
yeah, very far-fetched. I agree. But again, at that time, I guess the historical sources weren't that well known. And again, the stories that had most currency were stories that were well told. So it was less about how accurate it was and more about how interesting it was
Okay,
to
let's
so,
assume that he was Alexander. Let's assume, for hypothetically, let's assume he was Alexander the Great.
mm.
First, let's establish your case. What are you trying to get at? What
Okay.
if he were? What if he were Zulkarnain? So
So for me, that doesn't make sense because the historical Alexander the Great was not a believing king, right? He was
one,
pagan.
that's one. We both
Yeah.
are in a total agreement with that. Okay, and there's so many other things that Alexander contradicts with the Zulkarnain of the Quran. Okay,
For one,
now
Alexander the Great, there's no reference of him ever building a wall to keep out Gog and Magog.
or the first thing before wall is with the second people. The first people, he actually goes through a totally different event and scenario. Now one can argue that, you know what, we do not know everything that Alexander went through, and he could have built a wall. He could have had that interaction with the first people, which the Quran mentions, and then he could have done so many other things which now we know through history. No, well, so we cannot just disregard that argument or base our case on this argument that since these two things are not written about Alexander, so Zulkarnain is Alexander or can be. We're actually both dismissing Alexander as Zulkarnain because of other events and other data that we have.
Yeah.
Now, so if he's not Alexander, what's the confusion? Because you are asking about Zulkarnain and then you're talking about Alexander. Now we both agree that he's not Alexander,
Yeah.
but you're still interested in Zulkarnain. Why?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I didn't really phrase it properly, but my confusion is that the stories that you mentioned, which we have no historical record of Alexander doing, I agree with you. There isn't, though. But those stories that it says in the Quran that that Dhul went through, many of those motifs and events are mentioned as being done by Alexander in Syriac romances, which were written hundreds of years after Alexander. But the point is that they were stories, right? They were stories that had taken some historical inspiration and had twisted it and twisted it and twisted it over generations. And eventually, I went through many different renditions. But by the time of the Syriac rendition, which was written maybe only a couple decades around that before the revelation of the Quran started, this rendition, at least some of the motifs and events sound very, very, very similar to the events that's told about Dhul-Qarnayn. And so that's why, like, if we look at this from a secular perspective, like removing religion or anything out of it, it seems like okay, the rendition of Dhul-Qarnayn is from the Quran is just the latest in a long, well-established sort of literary tradition. We can definitely see, okay, first it was Alexander, some things that he actually did. Then they invented some things about what he did. Then they made him a believer. Then they merged the sort of apocalyptic stories about Gog and Magog into it. And then we arrive at the stage of Dhul-Qarnayn, like really simplified. But that's what it looks like to me. Um,
And there are a lot of people who believe in that. Even Muslims. I'm talking about the Muslims. I
hmm,
don't. It's not part of our basic tenets of belief anyway. Whether Zulkarnain was Alexander or not doesn't really matter. Does not change anything. But I
hmm,
particularly
hmm.
uh, do not believe in the fact that Zulkarnain was Alexander or Cyrus the
Yeah,
Great.
I don't either. I don't either. But so confusion is not that. Like I think that's settled. Like he was not Alexander. But my
Yeah,
my confusion is that why is this story of Dhul-Qarnayn, which is so similar to renditions which are very very much stories, like not rooted in fact at all, which were current in the Near East at the time, why is this included in the Quran, which is a book of divine revelation, right? Unless it were there for some allegorical purpose, but it doesn't seem to say that. It seems to imply that Dhul-Qarnayn was a real believing king, right? So
not just a believer, but also a very important figure in the Quran.
exactly.
For Yeah, let's look at the chapter in which Zulkarnain is mentioned. Zulkarnain is mentioned between uh, well, it's a set of five stories.
Yeah.
One of them is of Zulkarnain in the same chapter. Okay,
Yeah.
the chapter is starts with the people of the cave. There, we do not know how many are those people. Still, the verdict, the jury is still out as to how many were there. Even the Quran says, nobody actually knows except God of how many were there, except a few of these people. Most of these people are just shooting in the air. So it doesn't matter how many, but that's the story. They went into a cave. Now, the most interesting thing about that story is that they go into a cave and they go through 300 years of sleep within one or part of a night.
Hmm.
Okay. And they're trying to escape a tyrant king who's trying to force his, belief on them.
Yeah.
So they're monotheistic. That guy's polytheistic. uh, and these people are trying to save their faith.
Hmm.
And this 300 year is described. This whole event of them hiding in a cave is described so literally, bit by bit. Even the dialogue between these two people, when these people woke up, one group is talking to the other group, and the dialogue is written. Okay,
Hmm.
and nowhere in the Quran this kind of detail between with a group within a group of people is written. So this is very, very important that you should know. This is how the chapter starts.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the fact that we have that kind of detail of how these people were put to sleep, what was going on during their sleep, and what happened around them, the whole 300-year period passing, and the whole thing. And then it starts with the story of Moses.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, we transit into Moses going and meeting somebody across a realm. And that is another very, very peculiar story because a dead fish who Moses is carrying comes to life, makes its way into a hole in a water, a lake or a sea or a river.
Hmm.
Okay, actually, it's the middle of two rivers. Actually, it's the place where the two rivers meet. That's the verse of the Quran. And they go through that tunnel which the fish had made, and they cross the realm, meet another guy who does larger than life things. Every single thing is written in detail.
Yeah.
Now that's story number two. Okay. Now the story number three, and I'm not giving you details. That's a long, long story.
I know. I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And then comes Zulkarnain, another story with every single detail, which is so larger than life. And
Yeah.
then another story. And then the last chapter is about, the constructing your belief system around all of these stories. And, the whole closing comes in, which is the fifth part of the chapter.
Yeah.
Now, so you talking about Zulkarnain and isolating him out of these pack of stories would not do justice if you were trying to explain what Zulkarnain is and who he is and why are we talking about or Muslims or why the Quran talks about this one guy and whether
Hmm.
it was just a coincidence or did the Muslims or as somewhat one can argue and have been arguing that Muslims just took this story from Alexander and just put it in the Quran. Okay.
Hmm.
Now the fact that he's not Alexander because nothing like this actually happened to Alexander,
Yeah.
nor any of these sort of events are ever recorded in history. And
Yeah.
all of these events come in a certain chapter. Okay. And then you can get a lot more sense out of why Zulkarnain becomes a central figure amongst this sort of interdimensional travel, larger than life concepts. And we have not just the Quran, but the Hadith talking about Zulkarnain and the companions of our Prophet ﷺ talking about Zulkarnain, giving us so much data that this man was not an ordinary man. He had extraordinary powers to go into the heavens, and he could easily access the clouds, and he could have easily had these sort of journeys, which are mentioned in the Quran, not in this planet. in some
Yeah.
other dimension,
Hmm.
because Moses does transcend through dimensions in the same chapter,
Yeah.
and the people of the cave do transcend the dimension, and 300 years,
Hmm.
pass by
Yeah.
through a cave.
Yeah.
So it's not far fetched to easily deduce that Zulkarnain's placement in this chapter is not because of Zulkarnain, it is because of what happens to Zulkarnain.
Hmm.
Because the same thing happens to Moses and his companion, which is Joshua, and the people of the cave. Same things happen. Hence the placement in the chapter.
Yeah.
So we don't look at Zulkarnain, and I don't look at Zulkarnain as a person of history. I look at Zulkarnain as a person of technology. Not
Hmm.
that kind of technology that the word we're used to, but the larger than life technology. And you know what? In the end of times, in the eschatology, the most important chapter that we are told as Muslims, that is the one chapter that's going to save us from the biggest turmoils of the end of times, in which the larger than life events will be happening. Both the New Testament and the Quran talks about those. Okay. The
Yep.
Old Testament talks about those, but Old Testament does not really go into that kind of detail, but New Testament really goes bit by bit, especially the book
Hmm.
of Revelation. Now, the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament does go in eschatology, and it talks about, and book of Daniel, uh, Isaiah 51, 52, 53. Okay. They all talk about the end of times. Don't get me wrong, but the kind of concepts and the kind of detailing that and the kind of sketch the New Testament makes and the Hadith makes, complemented by the Quran, we find out that larger than life events will be going on. In the book of Revelation, I'm quoting you that the time of Jesus' second coming will be exactly the time of Noah. You know,
Hmm.
so larger than life events. Now, why am I telling you this? Is because as a Muslim, it is our literally uh, one of those most common knowledge of every Muslim, because it is the most authentic hadith. We're all told, instructed by our Prophet, that when that time comes, that one chapter in the Quran is going to save you. You know what that chapter is? The chapter of Zulkarnain.
Hmm.
And that chapter of Zulkarnain and the people of the cave and the story of Moses and another story of the gardens, two gardens, okay? Because that's the fourth story. That actually becomes a lot more interesting than just a person of history. Zulkarnain
Hmm.
becomes a technology, you know,
Hmm.
and it's not just that. The Jews actually asked, and they're not just the Jews. They asked our prophet, "Do you know about what Zulkarnain is and what happened to him?" Okay, and Jews have nothing to do with Alexander. You know that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Of
He
course.
was, yeah. It was not. He was not a Jew. That's for
Oh,
damn
of
sure.
course. Yeah. Of course.
so, so if they're talking about who's Zulkarnain, and in reply, and didn't ask about Zulkarnain. They talked about the people of the cave as well, and
Yeah.
very peculiar. They were particularly asking about what happened and give us details. And this chapter was revealed.
Hmm.
Now, you need to see all of this prism comes right. This puzzle comes right into play, and every piece comes together in a lot more interesting ways than you can fathom right now as a Christian or a non-believer of the Quran. Because if you go into the Quran and the Hadith, you'll be like, oh my God, if you had that sort of pieces of the puzzles, then what else is left? Because you got the whole picture right in front of you. Now, when you start talking about Zulkarnain, you'll be amazed as to how many Muslims are talking to me about Zulkarnain because I call him a man of technology.
Hmm.
Because most Muslims don't.
Yeah.
And every Muslim is also asking me as to what is in this chapter. Why is this chapter so helpful in the end of times, before the second coming of Jesus? Uh, and unless you look at it from this angle, it doesn't really make any sense on the face of it as to what is this chapter going to do to us or for us. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just giving you the whole holistic way of looking at as to how important Zulkarnain is.
I get
He's
that.
not just
Yeah.
Alexander. He's far greater than the great Alexander.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I totally appreciate that as well. Also, I just want to say one side thing. I'm not Christian. Uh,
No, I'm not, I'm just saying because there
yeah,
are Christians
yeah.
going to see this, and
Okay, yeah,
if you allow us, I'm going to put this video for my preaching purposes because your questions are really really good and they're
okay,
really relevant to my audience so that they can also because whoever has these kind of questions better get answers.
okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, no, you're definitely right. I wasn't really looking at it in that sort of holistic way. So, I was sort of looking at texts and sort of history and trying to,
Yeah,
um,
I know, me too.
yeah,
Because I grew up
yeah.
thinking he's Cyrus the Great and either him or the Alexander, because Muslims believe that as well.
Okay.
Not
Hmm.
It's not a tenet of Islam, just general Muslims, because
Hmm.
a lot of people talk and a lot of people write a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
But when you
exactly.
look at, yeah, you have to put a lot more lens on your, a lens of eschatology, uh, and science and common sense. Then you can get to put these kind of, pieces together.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, thank you very much. I have one more question, although it's not even really a question. It's just the way I prepared my note, it's like I put a whole bunch of research I have. And I guess if I read it and then at the end you'll sort of figure out where I'm coming from, but I can't really ask you a direct question about it. But basically, I'll just say I have an issue um accepting the um well, the fact that Jesus was born of Mary, who was a virgin, like the virgin birth, the virgin conception. Like I have an issue with this concept. Um, and the fact that it's included in the Quran is sort of something that troubles me. I guess that's the best way to initiate it. And this is also a sort of linguistically based question, but um, so I'll just read from my notes so you can get an idea of where I'm coming from.
You have a problem with the virgin birth?
Basically, yeah. I have trouble accepting this for the
Why?
following reasons. So, um, just bear with me. So
No, it's all right.
going. Sorry.
No, no, go on. I'm intrigued.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll start where my notes begin. So the original Greek word used in the Bible to refer to Mary is the word parthenos, whose primary meaning is a young woman or a maiden woman. It has the secondary meaning of virgin. You can look at this in a Greek dictionary. It has both these meanings because in ancient Greek society, women had to remain chaste until marriage. So it makes sense that these terms would be interchangeable. Um, but this Greek term used in Matthew, this is a translation of a Hebrew term, alma, which only means
Yeah.
young woman, a young woman of marriageable age. It doesn't have the meaning of virgin. And how do we know this is a translation? Because the verse in Matthew, um, I don't remember the exact number, but the verse is, "Behold, the virgin shall be with child and shall bring forth a son." In English translation, obviously, they shall call his name Emmanuel, which is being interpreted God with us. This is almost word for translation of a verse in the Old Testament, from Isaiah. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The young woman will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. So we can see, like, obviously, the verse in Matthew is trying to reference this older verse. The older verse uses that term Alma without the context of virgin. The Greek uh, Matthew verse, it uses this word that has both meanings, right? So it can be interpreted either way. Um, and so what makes sense to me is that people would have taken this term as being the second meaning, and from that, um, sort of created this idea of the Immaculate Conception, the virgin birth, as a way to further make Jesus divine in their eyes. Um, well, because at that time in Greek and Roman culture, um, in their mythology, this figure of a demigod, someone who was born of like a mortal woman, or even a virgin mortal woman and a god. This was very, very common. You can look at all kinds of heroes, demigods. throughout Greek mythology, Roman mythology, where this trope is common. Um, Even the Greek epic poet Homer, he claimed that he was the son of the god Apollo and a mortal woman as a way to sort of explain why he was so great at writing poems. So it's sort of like a thing that if you were semi-divine or sort of great in some way in that culture, then probably you were born of a virgin mortal woman and a god. It was part of the mythos of the time. So that's why for me it makes sense that Greek and Roman people or even Jews influenced by Greek culture at the time, they might have read this as being with the secondary meaning, virgin, right? And that's how this was created. And I believe I don't know what scholars, but I believe there are some scholars who have sort of drawn upon this as being an origin for the virgin birth story. I mean, like scholars of the Bible, right? So that makes sense to me. And the fact that this narrative is
Well,
included.
would you be okay if you were married?
Sorry?
If you were to be married, if you find a text somewhere in some book, some literature that Mary was actually a married woman, would that change anything?
Um, I don't think it really changes exactly my issue, like whether she's married or not. Like my issue is that I don't believe that this virgin birth was real, but rather that it was a sort of fabrication based on a
Why?
mistranslation. As I explained to you, a fabrication.
No, no, hold on. Because you're playing on this word Emmanuel, right?
No, I'm not playing on the word Emmanuel. I'm playing on the word. Let me see again. I'm playing on the word the Greek word parthenos, which was the term used in Matthew, which is translated in English as being virgin. This term has the meaning of young woman, second meaning virgin, and it's a translation of the Hebrew word from Isaiah, Alma, which only means young woman of marriageable age. It doesn't have the term the meaning of virgin. So what I'm saying essentially is that this translation into Greek added a secondary meaning to the word, which was not originally there.
Can you
And this
access the
secondary
Bible
meaning
right now?
caused
Can
a
you Google it up?
mistranslation.
I want to
Mm,
know. You're talking about
mm.
chapter 1, verse 23, I'm assuming. No,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, it is. I just looked it up now. 123 and Isaiah 7:14 is the verse that it references.
7:14. But yeah, but you're 7:14. But that's Emmanuel you're playing with, not. But
No,
okay.
no, Emmanuel, yeah, it's in both, but I'm not talking about Emmanuel. I'm talking about the word for virgin,
Virgin.
like the word in Greek and the word in Hebrew, which is translated into English.
So let me just let me get this case.
Yeah.
So since this word is from the Old Testament book of Isaiah, right?
Yep.
And Matthew borrows it or smuggles it, okay? Smuggles it. How does that uh how does that affect your perspective towards this? Since he's smuggling a word, that does not mean that she gave birth to Jesus or that she was not a virgin.
So it's not so much smuggling a word as it is translating. The original Hebrew word in Isaiah just has the meaning of young woman, and
Oh, that's the original word. But
yeah, when
what
he
you're thinking
translates
is
it,
Matthew did something, right? Matthew came up with something. He pulled a
yeah,
fast one here, right?
yeah, he
So
no, well, no, he just rendered the verse, or whoever wrote Matthew rendered the verse in Greek and used the term also in Greek for young woman, but it has a secondary meaning of virgin, which was a context that was not implied in the verse in Isaiah,
so
right?
so hold on, let me get this straight. So if a
Yeah,
virgin woman gives birth to a child today, would that really help you in believing Matthew?
that would happen today. Um, I don't think so, no,
Now,
because my
why does that matter whether she was a virgin or not? Because a virgin woman can give birth. You know that, right? Scientifically speaking.
how so?
And it's called parthenogenesis. You know that, right?
Parthenogenesis. I've never heard of this before. No, I'm not an expert in biology at all, so but
Yeah, well, it's theoretically it's very possible. And
okay.
yeah, it's done because of two or three reasons, theoretically.
Mm,
And it has never happened. And it can happen though. Scientifically speaking, it can happen. Now,
mm,
but that's not your case. The case is whether Matthew use the wrong word for her or not. Well, if that's why I said if you were married, you wouldn't just convert into Christianity, right? If
Yeah.
I give you a book saying, hey, you know what, hey, I found out that Mary was married, okay? So that would not change your belief system one bit. But
Mm.
since Matthew is using the same word, which somebody, well, Isaiah in this case, translated Isaiah, because Isaiah is uh, from the book of Navim. Isaiah did not write Isaiah. You should know that, right?
Yeah.
So somebody wrote on behalf of Isaiah a word. Now Matthew is using the same word. Uh,
With another meaning which wasn't in the original context.
yeah,
And
okay.
so
So
yeah.
assuming that, even assuming for the sake of discussion that she's not a virgin, but she is a young woman. So Matthew has the liberty to use
Yeah,
a
yeah, no,
word
yeah,
which
yeah. I'm
means.
not saying that Matthew made the wrong word. I'm not saying that. Like that's not my case. What I'm saying is that the Greek word has another meaning, which like I mean I don't know if it was even Matthew who wrote it, but I'm not saying that he was trying to mislead people. Like what I'm saying is that
Hold
people
on, hold
read
on, hold
it.
on. Let's just get
Oh,
one thing straight.
yeah,
Greek,
yeah,
Matthew, not Greek. Isaiah, absolutely not Greek.
absolutely not
Okay.
Greek. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay,
Septuagint, Greek.
Greek. Okay,
Okay.
yeah,
Now, since Matthew did not write in Greek, but somebody who translated that in Greeks,
yeah.
inside Greece, in Greek, on behalf of Matthew, is confusing you. Not Matthew.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so the person who wrote on behalf of Matthew is what I mean. And even
Yeah.
then, we didn't even know what that person's intention was. Like he might have,
Well,
because the
I'm
number one
assuming he's
meaning
the
is
same
like,
guy
yeah.
who translated Isaiah as well, because that's the guy who's writing the Septuagint.
Okay, the same guy. Okay,
Which, by the way, yeah, same guy. And by the way, Isaiah is not supposed to be in the original Septuagint. So this dude is somebody else who's claiming that he wrote the original Septuagint.
yeah,
Okay,
okay,
and
okay,
which
that
this
makes
this
sense.
version came way later because the
Yeah,
original Septuagint was way earlier because of the fact that we know the number of books and the name of the books in the Septuagint.
yeah,
But this Septuagint, which is now available anywhere in the world, you can literally buy it online now, the original
mm,
Septuagint. It has
yeah.
literally all the books of the Old Testament, which
Okay,
means that this is not the original Septuagint, which means that somebody later on in Greece was trying to confuse everybody, including you and me, particularly you, because this
yeah,
guy is using the same word for everybody, everything. In this
yeah.
case, Emmanuel and virgin.
Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. As I said, like this guy who we don't know. I don't know if he was trying to deceive or not. Like I don't
No,
think
no,
it's
no,
even
no. I
deception.
don't think so.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
It's not
again,
even deception. It's not deception. But that's not the
no.
issue. Like because the word it does have the same primary meaning. What I'm saying is that a Greek and Roman audience who had this sort of mythos and mythology about demigods and gods impregnating mortal women. This is very common in their mythology. They would have read this word young woman with the secondary meaning of virgin and probably associated it, oh, virgin. They would have had that association, right? Because coming from their cultural
Hence
background.
parthenogenesis.
I didn't hear, sorry. Hmm.
That's why I want you to read up parthenogenesis, and it
Yeah.
can literally it can happen in human beings.
But you
Only
said that
in
it hasn't happened though. It hasn't happened though, right?
well, we do not know whether it has happened. Nobody's going to report it. Obvious reasons. No one's going to report it for obvious reasons.
Yeah, okay,
You
yeah.
know, it became a very big problem for the one reason that we know of the same woman that we're talking about. It became the
Yeah.
biggest problem. We're still discussing it right now. Eh?
Okay,
So
yeah.
yeah. So
That's
I'm
valid.
just saying, it's that in where the egg can develop into an embryo without being fertilized by a sperm. Okay.
Hmm.
Uh, by the way, parthenogenesis is a Greek word. You should know that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It sounds very Greek for sure. And in
Yeah.
fact, it's using the
By the
same
way,
word I was just mentioning.
it
Yeah.
means virgin birth in Greek.
In fact, yeah, I was going to say it's using the same word that I'm referring to.
Yeah.
But means young woman,
Yeah,
no,
there you go. Yeah.
virgin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but no, it's biology. It's not just Greek.
yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
By the way, a
Okay.
lot of animals go through that. You know what? That's pretty common in animals. It's just not that common in human beings.
In mammals or in other types of animals?
Sperm and egg, hence,
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. As you can see, biology is not my strong suit, but that's really interesting. I'll
Yeah,
definitely
not,
read more
yeah,
about it.
but what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
it's humanly possible. Yeah, it is. Well, it's possible for humans, not humanly possible.
Hmm.
It is theoretically possible. And
Okay.
I want you to look up, calcium phosphate,
Okay.
and then look up the kind of probability these kind of ions can actually. But I'm not going to go in that kind of detail because I've read so much about this. But technically speaking, it is possible.
Okay.
Okay. Now, there are other ways and other instances where a single human being without mating can reproduce, and that most probably could be a female, and that's not parthenogenesis. Okay.
Hmm.
But let's not talk about that right now. But what I'm saying is, people would call it a virgin birth because that would look like a woman. But in this case, I'm assuming none of these things matter because the Quran talks about that this event happened supernaturally when
Yeah.
the angel came in and says, I have, news for you. And, Mary literally says in the Quran of what kind of a trauma she goes through when she hears this news.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and then the event happens when, he literally, uh, talks about when the word of God is going to enter, your womb is going to, you're going to give birth to a child. The word of God, not anything else. So that means the mechanism is very much there. All it needs is an agent, and the agent could be God. Yes, if you believe in God, then yeah, God is an agent of any and every process. And I am just telling you that the process itself, in theory, does exist in females.
Okay.
We just don't know how to trigger it.
Hmm. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that really takes, like
Yeah.
takes the floor out of my whole question because my question was
There
sort
you
of
go.
from the get-go, it was
Yeah, I
assumed
know.
it was impossible.
I know
So
where you. Yeah, yeah. I kind of sense where you're headed. So I just,
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
No, no, no.
Um,
Sure, sure. I'm enjoying this. Go on, because you're a thinker. There are not many thinkers, and I need thinkers in this planet.
yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, I guess I'm a thinker, but I'm primarily a student of history and linguistics, if you haven't already realized. So that's where my sort of
Yeah. Well,
expertise
doesn't
lies.
matter what your triggers are, as long as you're, using your brain and expanding your horizon. Because everybody has his own ways of getting towards the truth because it
Hmm.
excites everybody. That's our innate disposition. Truth excites us, and we get attracted towards it.
Hmm.
You're coming through history. People go through science. People go through psychology. People go through, different thinkers produce
Hmm.
their own thoughts and walk their own, make their own paths towards the truth. Sometimes not even knowing what they're looking for, and they strike gold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my three questions. I'd like to just sum up basically what you've said, what I've understood from what you've said, so that you can correct me, to make sure
Sure.
that I understood it properly. Um, so for the last question, the basically the sort of issue of the vocabulary, the mistranslation that I was talking about, um, in the
Of
end,
the
it's kind of
Injil.
irrelevant because
Injil.
no, I
What?
was thinking about the last one, the virgin birth. Like
Oh yeah.
that's
Okay.
it's kind of irrelevant in the end because one, it's theoretically possible that a virgin birth can occur anyway, and so yeah, it does. Yeah, and even so, like what the Quran's talking about is a supernatural event, and yeah, it doesn't
Yep.
really have any bearing on the case I was making. So yeah, okay, I understand that. Yeah, about the Injil, um, the answer was that. It was that words can come from any derivation from any language, and they can take on a whole plethora of different um, connotations over time. And it doesn't really matter what their origin was, but it matters more what they mean and what they mean to a certain people at a certain time. And yeah, and the
Yeah.
original meaning has no bearing on it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, yeah. Well, original. Yeah, you're right. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty much the conclusion. Yeah.
Awesome. And then the last one, Alexander the Great. I'm not sure if I worded that question well, though, Alexander the Great, but because my issue was never that he was Alexander. I didn't believe that anyway. My issue was that the stories which are told, which you really um what's the word, eloquently mentioned about how it's sort of like a larger than life technology in the context of a surah, which is largely about that, about larger than life figures and events. Um,
Events. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
my issue was that several of the events ascribed to Zulkarnain in said surah were already written in previous texts, but ascribed to Alexander, and texts that were clearly meant to be stories, not
I I'm
fact.
gonna I'm gonna try and send you a link to
Mm.
a series of videos I just did about Zulkarnain in English. Don't worry.
Okay.
It's about the whole chapter, but you can find the verses of Zulkarnain in detail, and then you can see what kind of detail, because God Almighty uses a totally different paintbrush for this chapter,
Hmm.
and you'll be amazed. It's so astonishingly, it's just delicious when
Hmm.
you read this chapter, and you can see because if you're using this lens to look at all of this, then you're gonna go through a lot more detail about Zulkarnain from the Quran. And
Hmm.
since you're not a Muslim, you're gonna actually get a totally different and neutral perspective uh, towards looking in the Quran and
Yeah.
finding out what kind of detail Zulkarnain has in the Quran, and where and why is he placed between these certain events.
Hmm.
That's something which I want you to look into as an mental archaeologist. You know
Hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Uh,
I no, I
yeah.
definitely like to look at that video for sure. That sounds really interesting.
It's actually a series of 15 videos, about 15 hours, 16 hours of, but you can spot you know, which part of Zulkarnain when it's about to start. You'll
Okay.
just see.
Okay.
It's a
Okay.
1 hour video and 15 hours, 15 clips. I'll send you the Zulkarnain part, and then you can go to the playlist. It's all on YouTube anyway. So,
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks so much. I do have some notes. I'm like obviously you're a busy man, but if you would have the time at some point, like because I'm generally not good at wording my questions so well, so I do have some notes specifically about the Dhul question that if you have time you can take a look at it. Would that be
No,
okay?
you can, I'm going to give you my number. You can
Okay.
call me, leave me voice notes. You can
Awesome.
anytime. Okay. Don't worry about it. I need you to uh, go through this uh, quality of literature, which I call the Quran, so
Yep.
that you can benchmark different pieces of literature, wherever you're gonna and whatever you're gonna bump into, divine, claiming to be divine or not, so that you can see how and what kind of angle. And I wish you'd know how to read and understand Arabic, so that you could know the actual quality of this literature.
Yeah.
But even the translation is going to give you the angle and literally the details, not that quality, obviously, because one word, just like unlike Greek, Arabic has many, many meanings of one
Mhm.
word. And the more you have that kind of vocabulary, you'll be amazed as to what kind of combinations you can make
Yeah.
between, a single verse. And all of these permutations make so much sense, and
Mm.
all of them, and that just becomes a big, interesting labyrinth of what kind of meanings you can get in given the context, and take it out of the context and treat it as in isolated words, and then keep changing your permutations of different meanings of the same words. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful, and I've
Yeah.
done that so many times, and it's one of those puzzles that I keep solving for my own self. And that's what I want you to do. Just, go through the Peshat, which means the simplest and the straight meaning, and then go through different meanings of the same words and try and use different combos and see whether it could mean something else.
Mm.
And it becomes so much interesting.
Mm.
Okay.
I am
So,
well, I am sort of starting to learn Arabic, but I highly doubt I'll be able to reach a level where I can appreciate the Quran to that level. But
don't
um,
don't sell yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. You have no idea how easy it is once you really put your mind to it. And if you have a purpose, oh my God, you don't need to learn all of Arabic. You need to learn the Arabic which is mentioned in this chapter, and then build up on it.
Hmm.
And I don't want you to force yourself into Arabic first, and then you're gonna just go through the translation. You're
Yeah.
gonna get, you know, the interest
Mhm.
generated because of this. Your
Yeah.
second or third step could be going into the linguistics of it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes sense. Well, thank you very much for your time and for your thought in answering my questions. I really appreciate it. Thank
No,
you.
you can, man. Thank you so much for your time, man. I'll look forward for your next contact, and don't be shy. Don't look at the clock before messaging me. Okay, I'm awake literally 20 hours a day. Okay,
Wow.
so yeah, so don't. If I'm busy or if you're in a session or training or a meeting, I'll just call you back, or reply a few hours later. But don't hesitate to call me.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. We'll be in
Yeah,
touch.
yeah, I'll wait, man. Looking forward. Take care.
You too. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, goodbye.